Reports indicate that dozens of remaining officials have been subjected to polygraph exams to test their loyalty. My understanding is approximately 40 officials have been asked to sit for a polygraph during your administration, and several have been asked whether they have ever made negative comments about you. Director Patel, FBI agents pledge their loyalty to the Constitution of the United States, not you personally. What is the basis for requiring polygraph exams of your workforce and asking them if they've made negative comments about you?
I don't know what reports you're referring to, Ranking Member, and I reject any reporting that has false information in it, so I'm not going to respond to that. As far as polygraphs go, generally they are always and always have been utilized at the FBI to track down those that leak sensitive information and have unauthorized disclosures to the media, and we will continue to use them to ensure the integrity of the FBI.
There's a moment in every courtroom drama where the question is so simple, it becomes dangerous. Like asking someone if they locked the door, and instead of answering, they start talking about crime rates across the entire city. So let me ask you this. What does it mean when a United States Senator asks a yes or no question, and the answer never comes? Because what you're about to see is not a normal Senate hearing. This is not routine oversight, not political theater, not even a policy debate. This is a stress test of accountability, and the system did not pass. The exchange begins with Dick Durbin doing something deceptively simple. He asks a question that cannot be misunderstood. Not layered, not hypothetical, not abstract, direct, focused, dangerous in its clarity. Was America safer? After Donald Trump granted clemency to roughly 1,600 individuals connected to January 6th. That's it. No trick, no trap, no legal maze. Just a question that demands one of two words, yes or no. And sitting across from him is Kash Patel, a man who understands exactly what that question means, exactly what either answer would imply, and exactly why neither answer is politically safe. So what happens next is not confusion. It's not hesitation. It's something far more revealing. It's evasion. Because instead of answering, Patel pivots. He doesn't say yes. He doesn't say no. He talks about drug overdoses. He talks about homicide rates. He talks about crime statistics across the country, as if the question asked was about America in general, not about a specific decision made by a specific president with specific consequences. And right there, the hearing changes. Because this is no longer about pardons. It's about whether a direct question can survive inside a political system that rewards not answering it. Durbin doesn't let it go. He tightens the frame. He removes abstraction. He introduces reality. Names. Real people. Real outcomes. Matthew Huddle, a man granted clemency, who returned home and within days was involved in a fatal confrontation with law enforcement. Not theory, not speculation, a timeline, a consequence. Then Peter Schwartz, 38 prior convictions, sentenced to 14 years, then released under the same wave of clemency. Again, not a statistic, a person, a record, a decision that led somewhere. This is what prosecutorial pressure looks like. You take a vague policy, and you attach names to it. You attach outcomes to it. You make it impossible to hide behind generalities. So the question comes back, sharper now, heavier. Was America safer because of these decisions? And again, no answer. Not a denial, not a defense, just movement, deflection. A careful walk around the one sentence that matters most. And this is where the silence becomes louder than any statement. Because in law, in testimony, in any serious examination of truth, what someone refuses to say is often more important than what they do say. Patel acknowledges violence against law enforcement is wrong. He says he does not support it. But when it comes to the core issue, the clemency itself, he stops short. Every time. And that gap, That space between the question and the answer is where this entire hearing lives. Because this was never just about January 6th. This is about something much bigger. It's about whether power can be exercised without ownership of its consequences, whether decisions made at the highest level can be defended without ever being directly judged, whether loyalty to a figure overrides responsibility to the outcome. And here's the uncomfortable part. Everyone in that room knows the answer. They just won't say it. And when a system reaches the point where everyone understands the truth, but no one will state it plainly, that's not ambiguity. That's avoidance institutionalized. Because look carefully at what just happened. The question didn't change. The facts didn't change. The only thing that changed was the willingness to confront them directly. So Durbin shifts again, and this is where it becomes surgical. He stops asking about theory, stops asking about safety in the abstract, and starts exposing the pattern. You don't answer a yes or no question. You redirect. You don't defend the decision. You dilute it. You don't confront the consequence. You replace it with something bigger, louder, less specific. That's not a mistake. That's a method. And if you've watched enough of these hearings, you recognize it instantly. Because the goal is not to win the argument. The goal is to survive the question. But then the hearing takes a turn that, at first glance, feels almost unrelated. Durbin brings up something called the J6 Choir, a recording, a fundraising effort. On the surface, it sounds harmless, charitable even. But this is where framing becomes everything. Because when you attach music, narrative, and money to an event like January 6th, you're not just raising funds, you're reshaping memory. You're deciding how that event is remembered, who is seen as a victim, who is seen as responsible. And when Kash Patel is asked about it, he distances himself immediately. It's not his project. He wasn't involved. He doesn't know who performed on it. He didn't receive money. Every answer is technically clean. But listen closely. None of those answers actually address the concern. Because the question underneath isn't, did you organize this? The question is, what does your proximity to it say about your judgment? And that's a much harder question to answer. So again, we see the same pattern. Narrow the responsibility. Limit the scope. Stay within what can be denied. Avoid what has to be explained. Then it escalates. Durbin introduces names that carry weight outside this room. Laura Loomer, Stu Peters. Figures tied to conspiracy rhetoric, to narratives that operate far outside verified reality. And now, the question isn't about pardons anymore. It's about association. Why are you appearing alongside these individuals? Why do these connections keep happening? What does that signal, especially for someone who has operated inside national intelligence structures? And Patel's response is immediate, and again, carefully constructed. Appearing is not endorsing. Engaging is not agreeing. Being present is not being responsible. On paper, that argument works. But in the real world, especially in politics, appearance is influence. Association is signal. And repeated proximity is not random. Because public figures don't just exist in isolation. Every stage they stand on, every platform they share, every photo they take, it builds a pattern. And patterns are what people judge. This is no longer a hearing about a single decision. This is a layered examination of judgment, of alignment, of where someone chooses to stand when the lines are not blurred, but clearly visible. And by now, the tension in the room isn't coming from what's being said. It's coming from what keeps being avoided. And by the time you reach this point in the exchange, the hearing is no longer moving forward. It's tightening. Because every deflection, every narrowed answer, every carefully chosen phrase isn't diffusing pressure, it's concentrating it. Durbin understands that. And more importantly, he understands something most viewers miss. When someone refuses to answer directly, you don't ask a different question. You make the original question impossible to escape. So he circles back, not with volume, not with outrage, but with precision. You say you oppose violence against law enforcement. You say you support accountability. You say you don't agree with commutations for those who commit violence. Fine. Then answer this. Was the decision that released them into the public a mistake? And again, the answer doesn't come. Instead, Patel expands the battlefield. He brings in another case. He mentions a commutation under a different administration, a different crime, a different context. He introduces the name Leonard Peltier, reframes the conversation, shifts the moral weight across the aisle. This is whataboutism, but not the lazy kind. This is strategic displacement. Because if every action can be balanced by another, if every decision can be countered with a worse one, then no single decision ever has to stand on its own. And in that world, accountability dissolves. But here's where the logic starts to fracture. Because Durbin is not asking about both sides. He's not conducting a comparative analysis of presidential power across decades. He's asking about one decision, one moment, one outcome, and whether it made the country safer. That's it. So when Patel refuses to isolate that decision, refuses to evaluate it on its own terms, what he's really doing is removing the ability to judge it at all. And that's not neutrality. That's insulation. Because once a decision cannot be judged independently, it cannot be criticized. And once it cannot be criticized, it cannot be held accountable. Now step back and look at the pattern forming in real time. A direct question is asked. A broader issue is introduced. A different administration is invoked. A larger crisis is referenced. And somewhere in that expansion, the original question disappears. But Durbin doesn't let it disappear. He brings it back, again and again and again. Not because he expects a different answer, but because repetition exposes intent. Because the more times a question is asked without being answered, the clearer it becomes that the silence is not accidental. It's deliberate. And that's where the hearing crosses into something deeper than policy. This is no longer about clemency. It's about the boundaries of truth inside a system built on public record. Because think about what's happening here in plain terms. A senator is asking whether releasing individuals with documented histories of violence, some of whom reoffended, made the country safer. And the person being asked will not say yes, will not say no, just won't say it. So what does that tell you? Not about politics, not about party lines, but about the cost of saying the wrong thing in a system where the truth is supposed to be the safest answer. And this is where everything that looked like a simple exchange finally reveals what it really was. Because by now, the question has been asked, reframed, narrowed, repeated, and still it remains unanswered. Not because it's unclear, not because it's complex, but because answering it would force a line to be drawn. And in this room, drawing that line is the one thing no one wants to do. So let's strip it down to its rawest form. A president used one of the most powerful authorities granted under the Constitution, the power of clemency. A power that can override courts, override sentences, override the entire machinery of justice with a single decision. That power was used not once, not sparingly, but at scale. Roughly 1,600 individuals connected to January 6th. And among those individuals, some returned to communities and committed further acts of violence. Those are not hypotheticals. Those are outcomes. So the question isn't legal. The authority is not in dispute. The question is moral. Was it the right decision? Knowing what followed? And when Dick Durbin forces that question into the open, and Kash Patel refuses to answer it directly, what you're witnessing is not uncertainty. It's the cost of political alignment colliding with public accountability. Because here's the reality no one in that room says out loud. If the answer were yes, if America were clearly safer, there would be no hesitation. That would be the easiest defense in the world. If the answer were no, if the decision clearly made things worse, then saying it would mean directly challenging Donald Trump and everything tied to that decision. So instead, the answer lives in a place where it can't be quoted. And that's the most revealing part of all. Because in a system built on testimony, where every word is recorded, archived, replayed, refusing to answer becomes its own kind of answer. Now take a step back and look at the bigger picture this moment exposes. This isn't just about one hearing. It's not just about one set of pardons. It's about whether power in this country still carries responsibility that can be clearly stated, clearly defended, and clearly judged. Or whether we've reached a point where the most important questions are the ones no one is willing to answer directly. Because when accountability becomes optional, when clarity becomes negotiable, when even a yes or no question turns into a 5-minute detour through unrelated statistics and political counterexamples, you don't just lose the answer. You lose trust. Trust that decisions are made for the public good. Trust that consequences are acknowledged. Trust that when something goes wrong, someone will stand up and say it plainly. And without that trust, the system doesn't collapse all at once. It erodes. Quietly. Gradually. One unanswered question at a time. So we come back to where this all started. Was America safer because of those pardons? After everything you've seen, everything you've heard, everything that was said, and everything that wasn't, ask yourself this. If the answer were simple, why couldn't anyone say it? And if they won't say it in that room, under oath, under scrutiny, then who is it actually being protected for? If you want more breakdowns like this, where we go beyond the headlines and expose what really happens inside these high-stakes hearings, make sure you like this video, drop your thoughts in the comments, share it with someone who needs to see it, and subscribe to the channel.